All rise. Honorable Judge Val and Judge Pickett now residing. Please be seated. Judge Pickett will be joining us virtually. Case number 001, Ezekiel versus the people, is now in session. Defendant, the stand is yours. Your honors, gentlemen and gentlemen of the jury, why have we been called here today? What is the purpose for putting this widower, Ezekiel, on trial? You see, all I see here is not being a terrorist, inciting riots, disloyalty, heresy, recruiting others for illegal activities, or even blasphemy. Instead, I see a list of personal opinions. Personal opinions of the accuser. In fact, the accuser has tried to use these personal opinions to incite a negative response against my client. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. Sustained. These charges are not just opinion, counselor. Keep these statements to factual and contextual, please. Of course, Your Honor. Gentlemen and gentlemen of the jury, what I would like you to do is look at these charges being brought against my client one at a time. We're going to walk through them together. And I'm going to, in fact, show you that these are false charges. And more than just false charges, they are propaganda used by the accuser to silence my client. Now, the first charge against my client would be a perfect example of false propaganda, of propaganda against my client to keep him silent. Objection, leading the jury. Sustained. Counselor, if I have to tell you again, I will hold you in contempt of this court. Do not use false statements. Your Honor, if I may, I would like to enter item number 1 into evidence. As you can see, this is the books of law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. What do you think about these 5 books we hold up here in this court? The book we call law? Are they made up stories? Are they about some figment of our imagination, some silly Billy Rabbit that went on these crazy stories? Or are they the truth that we hold as real evidence in our very real court? And let me ask you this, do these stories encourage terrorism? If they are in fact real, do they encourage terrorism? Do they incite violence? If you would, for me, members of the jury, I want you to remember the story of Moses out of Exodus in this first part of the evidence here. You see, he went into Egypt and he brought with him the plagues of God. Plagues that he put upon the Egyptians. You see, he created a problem for the nation of Egypt. Was Moses a terrorist? He incited terror upon the people of Egypt, so much so that the agenda he had set forth was brought out. In other words, they let his people go. So was he a terrorist? No, he was not trying to be a terrorist. Instead, he was doing the will of God, the same God that we say we follow every day. So why would we call Ezekiel a terrorist for doing the same exact thing Moses did instead of marching our ancestors out of Egypt? Instead, he's simply giving the word of God to the people. But maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe Moses isn't enough. So I want you to think about Joshua and the battle of Jericho. Objection, Your Honor, leading the jury. Sustained. Seeing as this is a new offense, again, I will give you one more chance, counselor. You cannot use secondary sources without entering them into evidence. So this story, not being from the book of laws as entered as evidence, item 1, will not be used and should not be applicable to this situation. Stenographer, please strike that from the record. Jurors, forget the book of Joshua mentioned. My apologies, Your Honor. Jury, do you see what I'm saying to you this morning? My client is not a murderer. He is not inciting violence and craziness. My client is trying to save. He's loving beyond what he's called to love. He's taking the word of God, he's chewing on it, he's digesting it, and he's spitting it back out for us to hear because we're in trouble. You see, this man is not a terrorist. This man is a follower of God. To the next charge against my client, he is not trying to incite riots. That would fall into terrorism. What he's trying to do is he's trying to remind us of what's going on in the world today. Because you see, God came down and told him something very specific was going to happen. And if there's rioting going on, then maybe it's not my client's fault. Maybe it's because those that are rioting are not living in accordance to evidence item number 1. Maybe that's the real problem, is they're not believing and following in what we call the book of law. Instead, they're doing their own thing. Now that God's mad, they're trying to make it someone's fault. They're trying to make my client their scapegoat. And you know, in all reality, this approaches the charge of loyalty as well. You see, my client is probably the most loyal person to our people there is, because a loyal person doesn't just always fill somebody with rainbows and butterflies. Instead, they fill us with the truth, and the truth of God came down. My client received it and is now trying to tell us what is fixing to happen if we don't change our ways. There is no more loyalty in the world than that. So my client is not disloyal. My client is the most loyal person probably in this courtroom today. Many of us are farmers. I am. I'm part-time lawyer, part-time farmer, but I'm also part-time shepherd. And I would assume most of us have a flock or a herd of some kind of animal. What happens when one of them runs away? Do you have to leave your herd in the safety of a fence and go find your other animal, your other livestock? Or do you just let them die? You see, Ezekiel is trying to do just that. We have left what God has called us to do. We have left the flock. And Ezekiel is trying to leave those that understand the law behind so he can go and get those of us who don't and bring us back into the safety of the fence. There is none more loyal than my client. As far as my client being a heresy or a heretic, you better believe it. But so was Moses and Aaron. They went against the religious belief of the people, not of God, of the people. Of course, my client is a heretic to you because we aren't following the law of God, we're following the law of man. But if you believe in what our evidence item number 1 says, then you'll know that he is not a heretic. In fact, he is a prophet of God. The heretics are those of us accusing him. It's the defendant who is the prophet, not the convict. And to the charges of blasphemy, my client is trying to save us from damnation. He's trying to save us from worshiping idols, the wrong God, from falling into this Babylonian exile's trap all around us. And truthfully, if you think that my client is a blasphemer, is speaking in blasphemy, then maybe you're not worshiping the God you say you are. Maybe, just maybe, you've let idols, the gods of this nation, the gods of other peoples, step in and become your God. And that's why it's blasphemy to you, because he's speaking the truth of the real God.
Objection, Your Honor. Matter of opinion.
Overruled. Continue, counselor.
You see, Jerry, this is not a problem with my client being guilty of these charges. You see, it is with us as a nation. We're the guilty party. We've gotten so far away from what God said that he had to come down to my client. And he had to give him the scroll that he had to eat and tasted so sweet. He had to take in this nourishment of God. He had to digest it. He had to take it and stew it over and sit on it, so much so that it drove him into a depression. My client has physical and mental ailments that come over him every single day because he is trying to do the will of God. And the people of God, who say they are people of God, are trying to put him in jail, or better yet, kill him. You see, my client is spreading the truth. And maybe you can't handle the truth. Because the reality is you're punishing him for doing what God told him to do in the first place. Anybody here ever followed what the 5 books we have as evidence number 1 say? You know, God wrote those and he told you what to do. He told you to follow these rules. Well, if you follow those rules, that's exactly what my client's doing. He's following what God said. He hadn't broken the rules. He's upholding them. You see, the truth is yes, my client is not perfect. He has problems like everybody else in the world. But he is not guilty of what you're trying to convict him of. He is not guilty of being a terrorist or of inciting riots, of being disloyal to the people, of being a heretic, of recruiting others for illegal activities, or being blasphemous. My client is innocent of these charges. The only thing my client is truly guilty of is loving his people enough that he would take what God said and take it back to them. Because he knew he would be put in this situation. If you knew you were going to jail tomorrow, would you commit the crime today? Because it's exactly what my client had to do. He knew that when he started bringing the truth of God to this nation, they would put him in jail or try to kill him. Well, I'm telling you today that the evidence we have for this case do not point to my client being guilty. Instead, they point to my client being unequivocally, 100% accurately innocent of all charges. There's nothing we can say, nothing we can do that will make him become a terrorist, a former of riots, disloyal to the people, a heretic, a recruiter of illegal activities, or even a blasphemer. My client is innocent. Your Honor, if anybody says they follow this book that Yahweh, God Himself, gave to Moses on the mount all those years ago, there is no possible way they find my client guilty today. But I do challenge them, not you, Your Honor, but I challenge our jury who has to make this decision. If you believe the Word of God, this book of law, this item number 1 in our evidence, and you have not broken a single command, then I beg you to convict my client. Convict me. But if you have broken a command, if you have disobeyed the book of law, then I guarantee my client is innocent. You cannot find my client guilty today. Much like those on the foot of the mountain when Moses came down with the tablet of God, we have strayed so far away that what God says seems blasphemous. But no longer. We will not charge my client today. We will not charge my client tomorrow. We will free my client. We will take these charges off of my client's head because he is innocent of every single one of them. And as catchy as this sounds, ye who are sinless, cast the first stone. I don't know where that came from. I don't know who said that. But here in the exile of Babylonia, ye who are sinless, cast the first stone. Your Honor, I rest my case.